Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Courtenay Turner, who is a podcast and radio host and also a writer and a aerial acrobatic artist. Might be another term for that, but she likes to twist up in the air. She studies patterns of power, both covert and overt, and in this conversation, that is what we explore a lot of her research, which kind of goes all over the map. If your appetite is sufficiently whetted for Courtenay Turner's work, definitely check out the links to it in the description below. And as always, if you enjoy this channel, consider liking, subscribing, and donating via the tip jars below. Without further ado, here is Courtenay Turner.
Good. Busy day.
Really?
I think there's 4 today.
Oh,
Yeah.
4 shows, huh?
Yeah.
Wow, you're really hitting the circuit.
Yeah. I was just, two are mine, and I was on a radio show this morning. So we did a recap of our trip to the Senate.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah. So, yeah, apparently, and then actually, when we were about to leave, one of the senators called me, and I had called him because apparently he was making claims that he referred to me as the woman in the black fur, and that I was bad and I'm not allowed back.
Ooh.
But when I called him, he claimed that that wasn't true, and I've heard it from several people though, so I'm pretty sure it was true, unfortunately.
What is it about your black fur? What is that? Is he like an animal
I
rights?
think he just didn't know my name.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that was just the identifier, like the brown hair girl. He referred to me as the woman in the black fur because he didn't know my name. But yeah, but when I called him out on it, he was like, "Oh, no, it was a great conversation." And I said, "Great, because we will be coming back next week." So
What is the content of the complaint, if it is a
that
complaint?
one was on education. It was we were, trying to inform them why we were not fans of school choice. And the same day, the Americans for Prosperity was there advocating for school choice.
Yeah.
And I had just been there a week before talking about the natural asset companies, which we had a huge win, though. The SEC did withdraw the proposal for natural asset companies.
Yeah,
So.
James Lindsay was talking to me about that, which is just insane that they were total insane scam.
Literally commodifying the air. Yeah.
Well, I mean, somebody's got to do
Yeah.
it. I mean, it's just a bunch of financial potential. You don't want to leave that on the table.
$5 quadrillion is what they thought.
Quadrillion. Now they're just making up numbers.
Yeah, literally, just making up numbers.
Throw a couple more zeros on that.
Why not? I mean, at that point,
Slice a cloud over there.
May as well. Yeah. So,
Oh.
yeah. So I went and I did a presentation on that. One of the senators actually invited me. He's wonderful, but he invited me to do a presentation because none of them knew of it. None of them had heard about it. But at that point, they had postponed it because of the weather, but they did, they did bring me in anyway to speak. And at that point, I really wanted to just warn them so that we could, so that they could be on the lookout for how they're going to circumnavigate. And
Okay.
Yeah, they're still moving forward. And I've seen several of the bills already, which they are kind of progressing. Yeah. So
if you were able to count them, about how many issues would you say you have?
How many issues?
Yeah, how many issues?
What kind of
Like if an issue were a pie, how many pies do you have your fingers in? Because it's school choice and that SEC land.
Right. Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't really you mean in terms of political stuff or in terms of
what?
I don't know. I mean, those are the 2 big ones right now that I mean, I think there's lots. I mean, I found out today that they have a bill about making it illegal to buy cold beer because that's top priority.
Wait, what?
So,
Wait,
yeah.
Oh, to cut down on refrigeration.
That's what people are saying. I don't know. I honestly think it's just a distraction because this, okay, they get 15 bills a month, and so that's obviously top priority. So now people are gonna, argue against that one and miss some other more important things.
Huh.
Not that that's, not important, but
I don't know. I don't know what is or not important to our
Yeah.
great
I don't know, but
leaders.
I'm not like, I mean, I don't, last 2 weeks ago when I went to, or maybe it was 3 weeks ago now, I've lost track, but when I went to present on the NACs, that was probably my first time ever doing anything like that. I mean,
Okay.
so, and then I just happened to get invited to do this thing on school choice also shortly after. So it was just strange because, yeah, I had never done that
So
before.
you haven't been like a long time political agitator.
No,
This is just like
I
an
don't know that I am now, but yeah, no. Yeah, no, definitely not.
Well, what got you into this politicking then? Like, what was your path into it? Being engaged in this manner with government, I guess.
With the natural asset
Well,
companies,
just like,
or
yeah, how did you get involved in being involved?
well, I'm a podcaster, so I mean, I had started a radio show, I guess, a few months ago, and so that was my kind of first foray into doing more of the lecture style solo type stuff
Yeah,
because I don't know, I've have over 400, I think over 450 interviews. So, it's usually long form interview style. That's very different. So that was kind of the first time. And I had a show all scheduled for that particular day. And I had been working on it for a while. It was kind of investigative, like on an NGO. And I did end up releasing that. But I had found out about the NACs and I was like, this needs to be like the alarm needs to be sound on this like
yeah,
now.
yeah.
So I did a show on that, and we had friends who were they're very politically involved, and they were at some meeting in East Tennessee, and one of the senators asked if anybody had known about the NACs and what was happening with the SEC, and they, I guess, were like only 2 out of 3 people who raised their hands, and they said, "Oh, our friends just did a show on this."
Oh,
And so the senator called me and he said, "Would you come do a presentation for uh, the committee?" There was a lot of shuffling around of who would be available, and so it ended up being tailored to the agricultural committee, which makes sense. But
okay. Yeah.
so that's yeah. So I kind of randomly got involved,
Huh.
but yeah.
You said you have 400 interviews. Is there a particular topic that you've done, or do you just kind of do like me and just search for
It's
people to talk to?
It's all over the place. Yeah. So I started, my journey was kind of also kind of random. I was living out in Santa Monica, California at the time. And, it was during 2020, the lockdown started. And for me, the masks were a huge problem because I'm hearing impaired. And I wear bilateral hearing aids, but I actually learned how to speak by reading lips. I didn't get hearing aids till I was almost 6 years old. And so I found myself like really isolated, really depressed. And I normally didn't really speak too much about politics or share too much of my views in general because I lived in Santa Monica, California. I was in the entertainment industry, I was in the fitness industry, I was in the circus industry, and none of them were really wanting to hear my views, if you will.
Huh.
I wasn't like silent about them because I used to write and do interviews for Politichicks. And yeah, so so people knew where I stood, but I really tried not to, you know, look for fights. So
Yeah.
I was, stayed out of it mostly on social media and whatnot. But then at that time, I found myself just really having a hard time not speaking out and not saying anything. And I honestly didn't even start off intending to be political per se. When the lockdowns happened, I like found myself fired from both gyms I was working at, and I can't prove it, but I'm 99.9% sure that it was over politics. Just the sequence of events kind of points in that direction.
Yeah.
I'm an aerial acrobatic performer, and I was speaking about my birth story, and I talked about movement as a metaphor for life and using my personal story as a testimony to how physical training can teach you to overcome adversity in other areas of life. And so I was doing that, but all of those events got canceled, obviously. And so
Yeah.
I found myself with a lot of time, and I had thought I was going to write, but because I had some projects I wanted to work on. And at the end of 10 hours, I found a beautiful white screen staring back at me. And I decided this might not be the time to write. And
Yeah.
so I ordered 11 books that day and I thought that might inspire me. And so I was really just like, most of them were philosophy and psychology books. That's most of my academic background. And I found myself wanting to talk about the things that I had read. And this is when I started sharing stuff on social media. And it really wasn't initially political, but I guess my worldview came through and somehow people found it very contentious and,
Hmm.
started
What would be
arguing with
the
me.
essence of your contentiousness?
I don't know. I still haven't really quite figured that out. But people suggested that I start a podcast. And at the time, I really knew nothing about podcasting, like at all. Somebody
You
heard
just
my
hire a
birth
couple of
story.
roadies and get a microphone, and you're all good.
Well, I didn't even do that. I really just talked into my computer
Yeah.
at the time. But I knew nothing. And I tell people that somebody had heard my birth story and they were like, "You need to be on Rogan." And I said, "What's a Rogan? Why do I need to be on it?" Like, that's how little I knew about podcasts. And
Yeah.
so I obviously did some research. I found the idea really terrifying, but then I realized that it would be an opportunity to have naked face conversations. And because
Ah,
didn't realize how much all the coping mechanisms I spent my life developing were stripped from me by the mass. And that's my very long-winded way of saying why I started the podcast. So I really started it just as I committed to 6 months. This was, right in the beginning of 2021. And
yeah.
I committed to 6 months of just like, you know, recording conversations. And I told my guests that I might not even like air them.
Yeah.
So I was just going to have a conversation, but I really wanted to see people's faces and talk about meaningful things. And so I
Yeah.
did that. And then at some point, I found I really loved them. The guests seemed to really enjoy them. And I said, okay, I'm going to start releasing some of these. So I did.
Oh,
So yeah, I didn't have a specific topic. I mean, I was really just trying to figure out what was going on in the world and why things were so upside down.
yeah. Did you
And
figure that out? Because I'm looking for people's
you were looking for it
input.
too.
Yeah, I'm looking for people's input on that.
um, well, there does seem to be a spiritual battle, I think. That
Ah,
that seems to be the crux of it.
okay.
Yeah.
How
Um,
would you explain that spiritual battle? What's the framework that that is helpful for you?
I mean, I don't know. I think the most simple way to put it, it does look like there's kind of a battle between good and evil. I think, the details of that probably depend based on someone's worldview. Uh, and,
Yeah.
yeah, but that seems to be, there's kind of this battle between the people who honor free will. And this was the cornerstone
Okay.
really of my whole podcast is that I want to, be a part of preserving the free will of humanity. I think it's very much at stake. And it seems like there are people who want to enslave humanity and eradicate free will. And then there are people who believe that we are endowed with free will and want to preserve that
What's that
and
free will
take
based
ownership
on?
of it.
How does it scale? Can we have 8 million free agents walking around?
I think we can.
Yeah.
I know there are people who question that. And, some of them I think are in, earnest. I think some people genuinely question it. I think some others have a more sinister, view. It's more about control
Yeah.
and a power structure.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
but I personally think there's room for all of us, if there are even really 8 billion. I mean, I'm not so sure how do we really know that?
8 billion? Well, we know it's more than 2 billion. I would assume we're
We
not
know that, but I
terribly
mean, the
inaccurate.
numbers jumped pretty quickly, and it's like, what are they based on? Are they based on the census? Which does everybody fill out a census? What about third world countries? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. I
I
mean
think they
that
just have
actually
lasers in
genuinely.
the sky that count people,
They might.
like just like thermal tracking or something like that.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, who knows?
There's this guy named Sam Harris. He's a podcaster too.
Hmm.
He's like a
Yes.
co-agent or co-patriot of us, compatriot, or
Hmm.
even colleague perhaps. Um,
Yeah,
but he doesn't believe in free will, and I've
I know.
always had a hard time even with the arguments like free will. I mean, it doesn't matter if we have it or not. Like, it's to what degree for me. It's like, okay, to what degree am I free to choose? Like, to what
Mm-hmm.
degree are choices being made from me? And even if I am given the ability to make up my mind, like, what is making up my mind for me? Like, is it my passions?
Mm-hmm.
Is it my,
Mm-hmm.
virtues? Like, what is it that is directing my will? And to what degree can I broaden my ability to be free? And,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this other podcaster named Paul Vanderklay. He's a
I'm not familiar
Calvinist
with him.
minister out in Sacramento,
Okay.
and
Well, that kind of makes sense.
he
Yeah.
does mostly YouTube stuff. But he did this compilation of Sam Harris videos. Sam is arguing against free will, but he's also, yeah, he's not just arguing against free will. Like, it seems like his point of view is that people are wrong and they need to be corrected. Like
Mm-hmm.
people are wrong about how they responded to the pandemic, or they're wrong about the vaccine, and they need to be corrected. These people are wrong. And it seems like Sam Harris is, it's a fascinating episode. I'll have to send you the link and link it in the description, from Paul Vanderklay, because Sam Harris like eventually kind of just makes the same argument that a Nazi would make. It's like, if we could just re-educate people, if we can just teach them the right way to act, then the world will be
Mm-hmm.
safe. The world will be, free. So I just wonder, that's a long, circuitous way of kind of teasing out, I guess, where your position came from with regard to free will. Like, why would that be important to you? Like, what is the spiritual
Mm-hmm.
value of that, or the ethical value of that?
Sure. Well, I think a lot. I mean, I think that where do I begin with that? Because there is a lot there. And there's so much in what you just said as well. I mean, I think Sam Harris's position is slightly different than, I'm not familiar with the other one you mentioned, but Calvinism is based on determinism.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it's derived from that. But with Sam Harris, I think his mindset is a little bit more like this idea that man can be perfected, and we just, those that know and
Yeah, the
those who know
experts.
best
Yeah, the
direct.
institutions. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and this is, interestingly enough, the Illuminati's the name of the Illuminati was actually the Perfectibilists. So
Oh,
that was totally their worldview, was that man needed to be perfected, and they were just the
by
people to
what?
illuminate
By
how.
what process?
But by the, I mean, really, essentially the Gnostic elect, but
Okay.
they didn't say that. They said those who were illuminated, which would be the Gnostic elect,
Do you have
um,
any clue, like,
or
how
select.
they knew that they were illuminated? Like, because they were
Like, how
rationalists?
did?
Like, yeah, like what? Because they had power, or
Yeah, I mean, they felt that they had been the ones who had been educated and
okay,
initiated, that they would be the ones who would know,
okay,
and then therefore they could guide others. And I mean, I think we see. No, I'm not accusing Sam Harris particularly of this, but I think a lot of people have that shared world view, where they know better than other people, and they can guide them. And again, I think some of them, they really genuinely believe that. They
yeah,
think that, this is like the notion of a philosopher king, right? It's a very similar type of view. For me, I understand what you're saying about there being a spectrum of like how free are we? We don't know what we don't know, and to some extent, we're all inside of a box. And I guess to use another Plato reference, like if we're in a cave
Das
looking at
Kav.
shadows, and
Yeah,
we don't know if we're in
yeah,
the cave if all we see are the shadows.
yeah,
So I get that, and we all have the things that are in front of us and our makeup and our experiences. So there's lots of things that influence our scope and our view of choices, what, because we may have more choices than we perceive,
yeah,
but and sometimes we don't have we perceive what we have as choices not to be great choices. They may be limited, but I still think that we do have choice, and the ability for, I think the reason this conversation gets kind of complicated, I think, for people, is because a lot of it lies in what is consciousness. And,
yeah,
it's right. I think that's really where that's kind of the root question. And I don't necessarily, I think consciousness is actually a lot more complicated than we might want to perceive it, or than we can even fathom, actually.
yeah,
I don't necessarily think it's like in the brain. I don't think it's just a mind body question. I do see it as kind of an interplay. If like almost like an antenna. And this is why there is such a intricate interconnectedness between individuals and, a greater collective.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is that oftentimes people want to, debate that it's one or the other, which I think is a false dialectic. I don't think that it is one or the other. I think that both have tremendous value. However, what we have most control over is the individual. We have control over our own agency
yeah,
if we do have free will, right? And I think if we do have free will, then we have a lot more potential. And if you believe that there's a God, then, the creator endows human beings with free will. And that's kind of a cornerstone of being human, I
hmm.
think.
Well, at least a Western
So,
human.
well, I think that Eastern philosophy believes in free will too. A lot of them do. I mean, if you look at even like Taoism, it's more of a fluid type of, they're very much connected to this notion of an intertwined kind of consciousness,
Hmm.
but they still believe in an individual having agency.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
so I don't know. I think that obviously not all, but I would say even in Eastern philosophy, there's a lot of agreement with there being some sort of concept of free will.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm just wondering to what degree has your philosophy been informed by your practice of aerial acrobatic performing?
Well, certainly free will has plays a role. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's
In what
all
respect?
free,
Like when you're is there like an improvisational element to your work? Is
not
that
typically. I usually do perform routines,
okay?
but I make choices in those that work well for me.
Yeah.
Typically, when I'm performing aerial, I'm also speaking and organizing an event. That's like a lot to do at once.
Oh, really? Like you just
Um,
you have one of your roadies string up a line like a rope across a plaza, and then you just start and you have your little Western guy microphone, and you just start talking to the crowd as you're walking.
No, no. Usually I speak separately from the
Oh,
performing,
okay.
but
That's what the
we do an event. It's called the Cause Fest. Cause stands for Creative Artists Uniting for the Sovereignty of Everyone.
huh.
So the premise behind it is to create a platform for independent creative artists. Through my research, it's become very evident to me that they oftentimes use arts. They co-opt them for the purposes of culture creation, socially engineering the masses. Some organizations like Tavistock are very instrumental in this. I've done a lot of deep dives on Tavistock. And I was in the entertainment industry. I was an actress, I was a producer, both theater and film, and then aerial to some degree is a performance art as well. And so it's very important to me that there be a voice for independent creative artists because I think regardless of whether you agree with them, the analogy I always use is like, it's like coloring outside the lines. They're the people who typically are more inclined to do so and do so in a way that is very compelling, interesting,
Hmm.
potentially even beautiful, and draw you into that. So I think if there are people who are going to be divergent and likely to step outside of these sorcerer circles, these
Huh.
crafted narratives that are spoon-fed, it would be creative artists. But the industry is such that I used to make the joke that you had to bargain with the devil to have success, and now I'm not so sure it's a joke. It might be kind of literal.
Yeah.
Uh, so it can be pretty dark, and if you're not willing to go along with their narratives, whether it be literally abetting or just turning a blind eye, I think it's really hard to achieve success. So I think it's important to have the independent voices. So we did one June 3rd and 4th. It was in Tennessee, Middle Tennessee. And we had 53 acts, so it was 26 and a half hours of content. We have it up on the Rebels for Cause channel. And I did two aerial performances. I did one each day. And yeah, we had comedians, musicians, a bunch of speakers, yeah, some filmmakers. So,
You mentioned you name dropped Tavistock. There's a clinic in Britain that part of
mhm.
the clinic was devoted to child gender transition. Is that what you're talking
Yep,
about?
that's when people started to become more aware of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. But it started back in the early 1900s as the British Propaganda Bureau. It was literally called the British Propaganda
Wait, I'm
Bureau.
sorry, but it's a mental institution, is it not? I
Ah,
mean, it's a mental health institution, but you're saying that
that would be,
the same
I
place,
would
like
argue.
the asylum and the propagandists, are
Mhm.
intertwined?
Well, it's quite a rabbit hole, but yeah. I mean, it literally started as the British Propaganda Bureau. It was out of the Wellington House, and it was in the early 1900s. I would say around 1912, and it was designed to create propaganda to garner acquiescence from both the British people and the American people to engage in World War I on the side of the Brits.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it was through this that they created the Creel Commission. This was George Creel helmed it. He was appointed to helm the Creel Commission, and he appointed Edward Bernays, of course, the double nephew of Sigmund Freud. Interestingly enough, his nephew is the founder of today's modern propaganda machine, Mark Randolph Bernays. The propaganda machine that I'm referring to would be Netflix.
Oh,
Um, Yeah. And then he also appointed Walter Lippmann, who was an American journalist, and they oversaw the Creel Commission in the United States. They really guided Woodrow Wilson, which it was a pretty tall order because he ran on the campaign that he would not engage us in the First World War. This is where Tavistock, around 1916, they weaponized the term isolationist. We saw that resurface with Ron
oh,
Paul not yeah years ago when he was running. Remember, he was garnering a lot of support from the political right, and the way that they tried to demonize him was he's a crazy isolationist. We can't have his foreign policy. So those who know the history, this was familiar. This was certainly not the first time that they've
hmm.
weaponized that term. And very similar to the CIA, document 1035-960, and they weaponized the term conspiracy theorist. And we've seen a lot of that resurfacing
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's this notion of 5G warfare being information warfare.
Mhm.
And what you were just describing about getting involved in World War One, you see at the same time that there's this massive upscaling of technology in war, there's also a rapid upscaling of propaganda at the same time.
Mhm. Yep.
These vehicles for information and for human destruction, being weapons, are both just rapidly gaining credence. And so
Mhm.
entering
Yeah.
into
Typical.
this stuff that you're doing now, this podcasting stuff, you're also, do you think of yourself as participating in information warfare of a sort, of a stripe?
I guess so. Yeah, I do. I don't necessarily see myself as like, I don't know, that's weird. Like, am I a soldier in the war?
Yeah.
I guess so. I mean, I felt like it was really important to sound the alarms on the NACs, and I did. I can't really explain. I just felt like that was important, and I felt called to do that. I certain topics just will speak to me, and
Hmm.
I will, do deep dives on them, and yeah, try to inform. But I mean, I think I'm a very curious person. I want to understand how things work.
Yeah.
And, so as I seek truth, I share it. I don't claim to like have any ownership on it or be right all the time or anything like that. But I think that in information warfare, a lot of times what people are struggling with is access to the information or comprehension of
Yeah.
information. So yeah, so I would say, yeah, that is what I strive to do, is to bring access and clarity of information.
Yeah.
So, but
What
I
are
can
your,
only cover so much. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. And uh, what are your thoughts on the path of information right now, of the possibility of, a free and open internet, or at least channels of communication? Do you think that is, I mean, of course it's under threat, but what do you think about the threats to free speech, broadly speaking, but like the free exchange of information, especially in times of emergency, if one were to happen to us?
right. Well, free speech is definitely, I mean, that was kind of like, when I started the podcast, that was definitely a big topic on my mind because I felt like speech was really being censored very heavily. And I experienced that personally. I think the SPLC decided I was a hate podcast on number
Oh,
11.
really?
Um, and
Congratulations.
YouTube, yeah. And then YouTube took me down like pretty shortly after that. So yeah, so I mean, I really did experience quite a bit of censorship. And it was interesting to me because when I started, I remember, I don't know, I'm not a super confrontational person. So like I said, in 2020, it was pretty hard because I found myself forced to confront quite often. I got kicked out of doctor's offices. I eventually left LA. I think the final straw was a woman chasing me down the street with a knife, screaming at me, telling me I was a murderer because my naked face was going to somehow be a threat to her
Wait, did she
existence.
have a mask on at least?
She had a mask, yes.
Okay.
So
Was the knife
I was very safe
sheathed?
from her. No,
Okay.
the knife was, yeah, somehow that was not a threat in her mind. It was my bare face, but the knife chasing towards me, that seemed to be perfectly fine by her. Yeah.
Huh.
So that was one of the final straws where
What
I was
did
like,
what did
okay,
that do to your faith in Californians, if not
it,
humanity?
well, at that point, whatever faith I had left it was really hanging by a thread. So, yeah, that was pretty awful.
Hmm.
So, but with the free speech, I do think it's very much in jeopardy. But I think the powers that be, if you will, I call them parasite class. I think that they very much thought that the internet was going to be a tool for them. And I think it's very similar to like the early days of Tavistock, where, or even earlier when, once you had the printing press and then the ability to disseminate the information, that ended up kind of working against them. So now the channels are much less controlled. And I think that's kind of what's happening with the internet. That's not to say that we're not in some sort of threat of, like a cyber polygon type blackout, or they
Wait,
could do
what's
something
this?
like that.
Cyber
Uh,
polygon?
cyber polygon.
What
Yeah.
is that?
Cyber polygon.
Yeah.
Oh, like Klaus Schwab talks about this a lot, where there's like the potential for a media, like not just media, but like a, internet blackout where they could just shut down and go dark. And yeah.
Are they
So
proud of
it's
that? Or are they working on that? Or is it possible?
Well, I mean, it's possible. I think it's entirely possible. I don't know. I think they present it as like I think they present it as this is a problem and we need to address it. But I also wonder if it's a little bit of a, you know, predictive programming, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
They tend to war game things and they throw things out. Like a lot of people are familiar with Operation Lockstep. That's have you heard of Operation
Could you
Lockstep?
give me
It
a
was
precise of that? Lockstep?
Yeah, sure. So this was it was part of a Rockefeller joint with John Hopkins document. It was page 16 to 26 of this document, and it was called, what was it? Scenarios from Future Technologies. I think that's what it was called. Something like that. That was the title. And what they did was they outlined all of these different potential future scenarios that we must be protected against.
Yeah.
And a lot of people know Operation Lockstep because during COVID, they said it looks so much like Operation Lockstep. But if you actually look at that document, which was over 100 pages, they actually had 4 scenarios that could play out. Like hack attack was one of them, or I don't remember the names of all of them, but it really looks to me, while yes, COVID does look like it's a war game scenario
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. And Lockstep does look like very similar to COVID. However, there are elements of all 4 of them. And I think that typically that's what they do. Like they test things, they beta test, and then they, kind of collect the data. This is how Tavistock works, right? That Tavistock is really the founders of the field of social science. And that's what they were doing. They were constantly collecting
Yeah.
information in order to be able to weaponize it, essentially. And they do it under the guise of defense. But I usually make the joke that, like, once they have a D in front of it, then they have a Black Ops carte blanche budget to do whatever they want in secret.
Yeah.
You see this with ARPA, then became DARPA, right? Now, not to say there were no problems with ARPA,
Yeah.
but ARPA was at least a lot more transparent. Now with DARPA, we have no clue what half of the things they're doing are. So because it's under the guise of defense.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, sometimes those things that they're doing get weaponized against us. So yeah, that was a lockstep. It was very similar, a lot of similar kind of tactics, but I think they really use pieces of all four that they had laid out, and then they save it for a later too. We'll see how people responded and what might be most effective next time.
Yeah. Do you
I
think
mean,
that
that's just one document, but there are thousands, literally.
do you think that Americans, broadly speaking, are capable of warding off social control of that sort? Capable of evading it?
So the way I look at America, I have like my beekeeper analogy, and I see, it's not that I think America is like, there's lots of great things about lots of places in the world, and certainly the people all over the world. I think humans are incredible. But there is, I think, something very unique about the founding documents of the United States. And this idea of being endowed with inalienable rights from our creator, I think is a very unique concept. And this is where a lot of our founding documents are predicated on. And I think from that, there is a notion that human beings do have free will, and that through this, we are a bulwark against a lot of metrics of control and tyranny, tyrannical forces. I think that's part of why they're so adamant on taking down the United States. And
Huh.
I don't know that we're doing all that well at doing it, but I do think, and this is not the government of the United States. I mean, I'm just as upset with them, and especially now that I've gone, uh, to speak with some of them, I'm even less. I think I was a little more naive before.
Yeah.
I had much more optimism, but I think that the people definitely, it's incumbent upon us to preserve the free will of humanity, and that could be a bulwark against tyranny. Because if we have free will, then and we take ownership of it, then we can control our actions and the course of our life. That's not to say that we have, that we're unlimited.
Yeah.
I think there's a difference, but I do think that that's a huge defense against tyranny and tyrannical forces and control metrics. But, ultimately, like I get asked this all the time, like, can we stop the UN? Can we stop the WHO? Can we, all of these different big entities that are, very focused on creating a centralized, globalized governance. That's their mission. And I don't know that we can stop them, honestly, but I think that what we can do is create little sanctuaries as localized as possible.
Yeah.
And that can have a ripple effect. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's one solution that I keep discovering when talking about the path of globalization. Is like, well, what's the real counter of that? It's round up. Even it's even philosophically or ideologically, how do you fight, that kind of collectivism? And it's like, okay, we'll take ownership from of yourself, the clean your room kind of
Uh-huh,
vector
sure.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Start with that. Start with your personal relationships, your family, then your communities, and hopefully we'll grow from there.
Yeah.
And I think it does. I think that that's, I mean, you just think about interpersonal relationships. You can't control somebody else's actions. You can't necessarily, have control over an outcome. But what you can do is change your behavior and then hope that that has a shift in the dynamic.
Hmm.
And that's often what you're
Yeah.
looking for anyway, is a shift in the dynamic. So.
There is those founding documents of the United States of America that you brought up. One critique of them from kind of a faction of the
Mhm.
right, the dissident right, is that these things
Yes.
are just words on paper and they're actually not being enforced. So they don't really, they're fictions. They're complete fictions that nobody's
Mhm.
enforcing them. They're kind of evoked, some sort of magical bulwark against tyranny, but the entire apparatus of the government doesn't follow the law, and they actually have laws that are counter to those laws, like with if you go down the rabbit hole of the civil rights law and how that's shaken out to um, the judiciary kind of basically encroaching more and more onto people's lives in the name of
Mhm.
fairness or progress or whatever like that. So what is your when you look at how things can shake out, like with these different kinds of agitation, like my friend James Lindsay continually calls Christian nationalism a psyop.
It is.
A few
I
weeks
would agree.
ago, there was Texas had a kind of standoff with the government, and then a bunch of states had a standoff too. Um, and so
Yep.
when you think about how people are going to be pushed to the limit and they're going to push back at some point, maybe they won't, but is it necessary to have a pushback? And when do you know that that's the proper time to push back against the encroachment of a tyrannical, bureaucratic organization called the United States government?
Well, that's a loaded question. I mean, I
Yeah.
would say that there's a big difference between pushback and reaction, right?
Okay.
So I think that you brought up like what was going on with the Texas border and Christian nationalism, and I do think that there is an intentional. I do think there's psyops and designed to create extreme reactionaries, and that, of course, just creates a dialectic which advances the same agenda coming at it from both sides, right?
Okay.
So I'm not necessarily in favor of that. I don't necessarily encourage people to be, play reactionaries, especially when I think oftentimes the people who think that they're going to react and make a difference and have an impact usually don't do it nearly as well because they're not nearly as organized as those who are pushing the agenda.
Yeah.
But you had addressed like whether or not these documents matter. And I would say the fact that they're being ignored and walked all over, that's the problem. It's not the documents themselves. I mean, the documents, I think if we had some sort of restoration, then I think we would
Mm.
have more sanctions against these encroachments of tyrannical measures and control metrics. But I think this is, again, why it's so important to take action locally because I do think our federal apparatus is completely corrupt. I see that every which way I turn. And not to say that I don't think that there's corruption at the local level. I absolutely think there's corruption at the local level as well.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, it's not just coming from the federal apparatus. I actually think there is really, it's a very intricate web, this, centralized body that's vying for a worldwide centralized governance. I don't think it's like a one entity, but I think that is really impacting a lot of very local things actually, which is very unfortunate. But if people were to take action locally and under the principles of those documents, I think that we would have much more
Yeah.
power
Is a
and much more
restoration,
freedom.
you think, possible toward Americanism without an accompanying return to the what Americanism was founded on, being Judeo-Christian values, religion specifically?
So say that again.
Do you think that a
Um,
restoration of Americanism, like
mhm,
of
mhm.
constitutional republic,
Right, right.
people resurrecting those documents as the gold standard of our government rather than just like a signal, is it possible, you think, en masse for Americans to return to that without also returning to religion en masse?
I mean, I think a return to religion could have a lot of great outcomes. I don't think a forced return to religion will do any good.
Yeah.
I think that is, most people don't realize in the First Amendment, it's not freedom from religion, it's freedom of religion, which means
Huh.
freedom to have religion, freedom to believe and practice as you wish, freedom not to practice as you wish.
Yeah.
And um, I think that's a huge part of what this country is founded upon. I mean, literally, one of the primary reasons it was founded was because they were fleeing religious persecution.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's also part of what makes it work. It's also what makes it complicated. Now you've got a bunch of people with different views and different beliefs, and so of course that you're going to have conflicts then as well. But I mean, I just don't. What I'm seeing is now, and it just looks like it's coming from both sides. So you've got, kind of the left who has always advocated for an abolishing of religion altogether. And now you've got a lot on the right who are vying for the complete opposite, which would be a theocracy. And that seems completely antithetical to
Huh.
America.
Yeah.
America was about freedom of religion. That's not to say that I think people who are religious, people who do are strong in their faith, should be strong in their faith. They should absolutely practice, live their life as an example. But I mean, if we just take Christianity, for example, I think it's really bizarre to have Christians somehow deciding that they need to impose their belief system on other people. Isn't that like the complete opposite of Christianity? You would lead by example, certainly teach, but to force somebody else's will seems antithetical to Christianity.
Yeah.
So I don't know how, like, even advocating for something like a theocracy, or even just advocating that people have to believe in religion makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if you are a Christian, like that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So,
So what are some of the topics that just, I guess we're already doing that. I just wanted to like kind of
yeah,
back zoom out to zoom back in again. Just to
yeah.
reset the conversational lens. What are some of the like the patterns of your content? Like what you end up mapping out? Like it seems like you're doing some really high level and deep dives into power, power structures, propaganda, information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what are you kind of basically seeing?
I think that's accurate. I look a lot at power structures, definitely propaganda. Um, those are definitely a lot of the things that I look into, and it does seem like there's pillars in which they're operating through. Obviously, like the medical field, I think they're using a lot of that in order to control. And when you look at Agenda 2050, there's all sorts of biotechnical, digital, bio-digital convergence type things that are being used under the guise of being able to track and for convenience, but they really do look like,
Okay.
ways of literally controlling through kind of a nanobot Internet of Things type of system, which is pretty scary. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. So the question was, what do I, what am I seeing?
Yeah, I guess so you
I
are
don't know.
seeing a
I mean,
cabal, like a
I'm
Illuminati.
definitely seeing, but it's not I think people, when I keep making the joke that the only game people ever learned how to play was pin the tail on the donkey. Um,
Huh.
so people want to think it's a lot more, uh, you know, simplistic than it actually is. It's like people take a very reductionistic view of the world, and they're like, it's that, and we'll just blame everything on that,
Yeah.
whatever that thing they pin it on is, because it's different for different people. But they find the thing that the boogeyman, and I just don't think it works that way. From what I've seen, is it's actually a very, very intricate web. There might be a shared worldview, but it's a
Yeah.
very, very intricate web. It's a web of obviously financial institutions, NGOs, secret societies, um, a steering committees, think tanks. Um, yeah, I mean it's a pretty complicated,
Yeah.
and the analogy again I would use is like it's kind of like the mafia. The the mafioso, like the head of the mob, is not going to run around like killing people, because then it'd be really easy to trace. You'd be like, oh, get him, right? So he has a whole bunch of minions doing his, like, he's got a lot of hitmen doing all of his
Yeah.
dirty work for him. And I think that's really what happens. So you now have all of these webs, and it's very intermingled and tangled. And you do have some more underground secret groups. They're able to carry out things without being as overt or well known. They can carry out missions kind of underground, if you will. I
Yeah.
think sometimes literally, but
Doesn't that work against them though? If everybody's kind of following their own, if I don't see how complexity helps the system, though it does, it could obfuscate a lot of different intentions, who's pulling the screens and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
if it's too complex, and it's got to be a lot of people, if you want to control the world, you need a lot of people doing that. And there could be convergence of interests, but don't those self-interests kind of pull it apart? Like I just keep on thinking about the Tower of Babel. Like it's only going to get so
Mhm.
high before it starts to fracture, right?
That would be great. Hopefully that's the case.
Or
But
do
I
you,
think
but or is there a system by which it does make sense and it's cohesive and it's all working together? Like all these different groups working together. Is there kind of a system or a system of thought that allows them to
I
work
don't
together?
know that there's systems and there's
Okay.
ways of implementing. So I think a lot of it comes down to levers of power and, modalities of essentially like mind control. They are, and a lot of these, like, so there's blackmail, obviously, we know there's secrets. That's a huge way of building. Somebody feels invested. They also feel a sense of prestige. Um, there's also a lot of really dark kind of ritualistic type of things that happen.
Really?
Um,
Like that Left
and
Eye
this
Club
goes
or something like that?
the left eye club. Yeah, well, that's right, the Eye of Horus. This goes all the way back to the mystery schools. And I mean, we have evidence of mystery schools doing essentially what later became a much more systematized, codified method of trauma-based mind control. And a lot of the trauma-based mind control studies, that was a lot of what Tavistock was working on back when they were the Tavistock Medical Clinic. So there was, in 1920, the 11th Duke of Bedford, who was also the Marquis of, and it was centered in the area of Tavistock. But he is related to, who was it? I forgot the first name, but Russell, who was
Yeah, Bertrand.
the, right, who is not Bertrand Russell, he's
Oh,
the philosopher.
okay.
I think William Ian Russell, and he and Alfonso Taft's the president's relative, was the two of them started Skull and Bones together. So the creator of Skull and Bones is related to this Duke of Bedford who donated a building that became Tavistock, specifically designed for doing what they called shell shock therapy research. So essentially, it's later become like post-traumatic stress disorder research. And it was under the guise that they were studying soldiers and, trying to help them with their shell shock therapy. But a lot of that laid the groundwork for what became MK Ultra. I don't think MK Ultra could have happened without that research. So, and a lot of that research was based on trauma-based mind control, which was, goes all the way back to the mystery schools. They were doing all of these types of, and it is occult rituals. I've interviewed, so if you look at subcategories, I have lots of different categories of
Yeah,
things that
yeah.
I've investigated. But I've interviewed over a dozen satanic ritual abuse survivors. Some of them were MK Ultra survivors as well. Some of them were just satanic ritual abuse. Some were just MK Ultra. So it's a very real thing. And, people say, oh, well, some of them just make things up. And there are people, and there are people who are actually crazy. But, if they're all making it up, the stories wouldn't all be so similar. It wouldn't, and you can kind of tell when there's threads, that, and it's like, okay, there's something very real here. And it's really dark. It's really dark. It's really tragic. But when you look at Project Monarch, this was a CIA project, as a subset of MK Ultra. They were doing work that was based on trauma-based mind control, and it was all through intergenerational trauma, in utero trauma when possible, early childhood trauma, and they had some other requirements because the intention was to create dissociative personality disorders, which previously was called multiple personality disorders.
What
And
is
that's
the
a
use of such broken individuals?
So now you have all these different what they called alters, and this is really great for creating an asset. Right? A great movie, and I can't believe they did this, but that really showcases this. It's very recent. It's called Argyle, but they really laid it out exactly
Oh,
how
okay.
one could be used, yeah, as an asset through the dissociative personality disorders. Uh, yeah, so I've interviewed several, and it's fascinating. But Project Monarch, if you just look at the declassified documents, I mean, they talk about what they were looking for, um, and a lot of it was intergenerational trauma, these various stages of trauma, broken types of families, and IQs of over 120 apparently are more likely to dissociate than IQ under 120. So they were selecting for those. So yeah,
In order to do
it's
what? Just have
to
agents, like born
well
identity people?
for Project Monarch. So they were doing all these experiments on, uh, and a lot of it was around dissociative personality disorder, like how they could create dissociative personality. I mean, they were testing other things
Yeah.
as well, but you see that that makes a really great asset because now somebody can split and they don't have a recollection of what happened in that personality, but they can be triggered instantly. You can program them, and that's very useful if you want somebody to be an agent for
Huh.
you.
Well, what about this generation? I mean, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but insofar as
Mhm.
COVID and the response to that novel coronavirus impacted an entire generation, took them out of school or put them into like weird kind of forced uh,
Zoom, yeah.
Zoom things, a lot of dissociation with the mask and the shields, and a
Yeah.
lot of like, and if you're embedding that into an entire generation, um,
Hmm.
what's the game plan? If there is a game plan, is it to create and weed out, or to create a compliant populace, or a damaged populace even?
Well, I would argue both. And I mean, that was our entire education system. I mean, our entire education system was exported from the Prussian model. It was a three-tier Prussian model of education that was born after the Battle of Jena in, what was that, 1807? They lost the Battle of Jena, and it was during the Napoleonic Wars. And they decided that they lost the battle because the soldiers rebelled, and they realized the soldiers rebelled because they were critical thinkers. And so they decided they had to eradicate critical thinking, and the translation of what they said was they were literally going to breed mindless, obedient soldiers. And bless you. So when they, um, yeah, so when they exported, and this was largely exported to the United States. I know a lot of people are very familiar with like John Dewey, and he was a large part of it. But I would go back earlier to Wilhelm Wundt and the Leipzig connection. And I forgot the two who coined that term, the Leipzig connection, but it very much is a Leipzig connection. This is Leipzig University. So Wilhelm Wundt was known as the grandfather of the field of psychology. And of course, he gave the very first PhD ever, which I call the pinnacle of indoctrination, to William James, who's known as the American father of psychology. And there were lots of ties to that. Don Dewey actually was not part of the Leipzig connection, but some of the people but he was mentored by Stanley G. Hall, who was a student at the Leipzig University. Some of the other people would be like Pavlov and Skinner. So definitely names that have been very instrumental in shaping our education and the field of psychology. And they're both very, very much intertwined, intentionally so. And and then of course they did bring it here to the United States, and the whole purpose was to breed compliance. This is why it's done through a very kind of militaristic style. And that, of course, comes from Hegel. I would say that would be the right wing side of Hegel, that has the dialectic is he is kind of encompasses the both. But yeah, they took that. That's why it's like you ring the bell, to program to switch classes. They did this really interesting study. It turned out to be for NASA, and it was a study where they were testing, they started with 2-year-olds, and it was literally like 98% of them qualified to be geniuses. And then they followed them every 5 years. And by the time they were adults, it was less than 2% of the population qualified. And this is a byproduct of our education system because a large part of what makes a genius is this, independent, creative thought processes, which has been bred out of them through this very militarized
Hmm.
school system.
Well,
So
yeah.
yes, now it's advanced obviously through COVID, but now you have not only, they're not only breeding compliance and brainwashing and indoctrinating the students, but they've also traumatized them. So when you're traumatized, your brain, like your brain capacity literally gets reduced, and your ability to not just think critically and clearly, but also to be triggered obviously skyrockets. And so now you're much more susceptible to programming.
Hmm.
So.
So if that's the case, why not school choice? Can you help me square that circle?
Yeah, sure. So it sounds great. Who doesn't want choice, especially if you do believe in free will, as I do? And I would like to see it preserved if possible, if we in fact have it. But it's not school choice. What it is government school choice. So, interesting story about me. When I was in sixth grade, I was 12 years old. I actually created a board for school choice. So I've kind of come 180 on this issue. But it was very different back then. I grew up in a town that was a very small town next to a bigger town that my town did not have it wasn't like small town like country. I grew up right outside New York City, but we didn't have a high school, a public high school. And so the choice was to go to this neighboring town, and it was not a good school. It was just not a good education. It was not where I wanted to go. But I saw that a lot of the kids I went to like nursery school with, kids I was friends with, who actually lived closer to me, like their schools were closer just in physical distance than the school that I would have had, availability, the option to go to. And so I didn't understand this at all. I said, why don't my parents get to choose where they want to send me, especially if this school is a horrible school? And so I started this board, and that's what I was really focused on. If it's public schools, my parents should be able to choose, especially if the distance is the same or closer to another school, right? So that was what I was vying for back then. However, now what school choice is really designed to do is create public-private partnerships. It is all about a whole sector, and this is even in these bills. It's like now you've got all these vendors who are going to be attached. A lot of it is about mental health, and so this makes sense that this comes out of the Hegelian, Wundtian, exploitation of the education system. They do a lot of this tracking and measuring and controlling through under the guise of mental health and wellness checks. And so some of the public-private partnerships are going to be things like, the uniform. So you'll have clothing vendors, you'll have obviously the counselors and the mental health, the transportation. So now you've got but on top of it, whatever the government funds, it runs. So what it's doing is they have control over the public school. They have that already. They even have control already of private school students who have some sort of hybrid funding system where it's not completely privatized. But now what they really want is control over the homeschoolers, because those are obviously the ones who they can't track. They can't breed into, good compliant global citizens, which is really, you just read Charlotte Iserbytten. She was, she worked under the Reagan administration, and her father was actually Skull and Bones. Anthony Sutton, I might have it somewhere here, did a great section. He wrote a book on the Order of Skull and Bones, and the middle, like 1/3 of the book, is all about how the order controls education. And he talks about this as well. But of course, John Taylor Gatto talks about it as well. But even back then, all the documentation coming out of UNESCO and a lot of these other organizations were talking about how the goal was to create global citizens. That's what the education system was designed to do. And so that's what they want. They want to get all of these homeschoolers who are not being indoctrinated and brainwashed and not being bred into global citizens. And they can do that through these voucher systems. There's lots of names for it because that's what they do. They're great at marketing. They're great with language and manipulating the terms and changing definitions.
Yeah.
Just like school choice. It sounds like a choice, but it's not really, because even here in Tennessee, we don't really have completely independent homeschooling. You either have category 4, where you're under these umbrellas and there's strings attached there, or you have what they call independent school choice. And those already have to meet certain requirements to take testing, like standardized testing that's across the board. They still have control over some of the wellness checks, the medical checks, so it's really not independent, even though it sounds like independent homeschoolers, but that's not what it is. And so, like one of the bills that we were talking about, they said, well, they're leaving the independent homeschoolers out of it. Well, of course, because they're already being tracked. They're already being subsidized. They're already under that umbrella of the government. So what they really want to get is the category 4, which are not completely independent as they are in some states. But because really homeschooling should mean like you're out of the system. but they're not. And that's what they want. That's what universal school choice is all about, is getting everybody under the umbrella of the government.
W-
And yeah,
w-
I'll say it again, whatever the government funds they run, there's strings attached to them.
What is the content of a global citizen? If you're walking down the street, how would you spot one of those?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you would spot them unless they start making them all wear the same things. I'm not sure, but I think it's more about an ideology. It's more about they've done a really good job of breeding compliance in schools, and not just in the United States. I mean, this is, I would say uh, all over. But that's what they're really trying to do here, and a lot of the social emotional learning stuff is about that as well. I would say it's more of an ideology. It's more of a inculcation than it is a like do they have a certain mark on their face or
Yeah,
something? I don't think it's that.
it is. Well, yesterday was Ash Wednesday, so those people are easy to spot, or they were yesterday. Um, so if not
Yesterday.
school choice, then what are you for? Homeschool?
Homeschool, I think, is great. I mean, I think there's a reason so many parents have pulled their kids out of the school system. Bless you. I think some private schools can be wonderful. I think, some of the parochial schools, if they're truly independent and they're aligned with the parents' views, I think that they can be a great option. I think there's even kind of these hybrid homeschools, where like if the parents don't feel equipped to educate their children at home, they do kind of like a communal type thing. Some of those can be great options. I mean, I think about myself personally, I would have really preferred to be homeschooled. Most of what I've learned is completely autodidactic.
Yeah.
And yeah, at one point they put me in a Montessori school, but Montessori is great as long as there's the infrastructure. But I think that if you're outside the standard deviation, even if you're either really far behind or really far ahead, Montessori is, definitely problematic.
Why?
Uh,
For geniuses, let's say.
or for people, or for those who might have challenges.
Yeah.
So because they need more of a independent kind of or individualized type of plan. Yeah, but I mean, definitely on either end, I think it's problematic. So if you're kind of within the standard deviation, I think it can work pretty well. You kind of go at your own pace, but that pace isn't going to be too far off from other people. So you might finish like a chapter ahead,
Yeah.
2 sections ahead, you're fine. I personally, I went in third grade and it was a very small school. It only went up to sixth grade. I finished the third grade, in third grade in October. I finished the sixth grade math textbook and they had nothing for me to do. They
Okay.
literally just told me to sit in a corner and go read,
Huh.
which, you know, I could have done that at home with
Yeah.
possibly more resources and, like done more with that. Maybe I could have gone to take a, middle school math class or,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it
but
seems like there's a through line between that moment, that third grader, and where you are now, doing your own research.
yeah, definitely. Well, and I did a lot of that in, high school as well. I did 2 independent theses on dream analysis. So I like got permission. I was the first junior to ever do it. I got permission to do field study and then presented before a panel of neuropsychiatrists. And my school actually published the work. It
Oh,
was on dream
wow.
analysis.
Jeez
Another one
Louise.
in high school. And I did an independent study in philosophy in high school. I did several independent research projects that the school published some of them. But yeah, I was always kind of like, I don't like to be told what to do. I don't like to be told what to learn yeah. So I kind of, my like quote in high school was, do not go where the path may lead, go instead where there is no trail and leave. Go where there is no path and leave a trail.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. But I mean, not everybody's like that. Some people do need a lot more structure and guidance, and, that should be there. But who better to do that than I think the parents? But I understand not all parents can. So there needs to be options and alternatives that aren't government run, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think, if people want to put them in the public schools and the government system, they have that option already, but there needs to be options outside of it. You know, we have the option to put them in the public school, and for some people that works out fine. And I think that's a parent's choice to make.
Yeah.
But again, when there's no choice. Yeah.
What are some of the
So,
bigger narratives that you end up thinking need to be challenged in popular culture or just like the popular imagination, like right now?
interesting. I don't know. I don't know if I go looking for, I'm usually trying to look outside of the narratives because
Ah,
I think they're often being spoon-fed. And usually they're being spoon-fed for people to be pitted against each other.
yeah,
So I'm usually trying to find like what's outside of that and like not just find a narrative and reject the narrative. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, the pop culture right now is kind of interesting because I think it's been quite a pendulum swing. That I'm seeing like a trickle down of the original red pill movement. I've been informed that what we're seeing now is not the red pill movement, but I don't know. The
which
labels change
which
too
red
fast.
pill are you speaking about?
Right, exactly. That's what I'm being told is like, what's red pill? Um, but I don't know, this whole like trad wife, like, trend. And I feel like it's the culture has gotten so wacky that now people are craving some kind of traditionalism,
Yeah,
but it's like, what traditionalism? And it looks very shallow. It looks kind
yeah,
of vapid. It's almost like cosplay. And it's like, okay, like, so we'll just dress like 50s pinups and that's somehow going to fix the culture.
yeah,
Like that's kind of like crazy. It's very silly, I think.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think a lot of things that are coming out of this like pendulum. I don't like pendulum swings. Like that's what I'm saying. I tend to like to look outside of that.
yeah,
And I think that's how the game is played. It's like, okay, we're going to go all the way over here so that we can get a reaction all the way over there. And guess what? Eventually, we're going to end up exactly the same place.
huh.
Yeah.
Is there like a right left? Does that track at all for you?
As authentic or
Yeah.
as
Like when people say
I
like,
don't know.
I mean, it's
So
obviously a lie, like the Biden administration calling out white supremacy and the far right ultra MAGAs, it's transparently like some sort of weird cringy stunt that they're doing, but is there like a danger from the left or a danger from the right from your point of view?
yeah, I think there's tremendous danger from both, honestly. I posted a tweet pretty recently, actually, and I said that oftentimes people think of, political labels as like philosophical constructs and ideology. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, in application, what I actually see is target audiences for marketing. Because what happens, I think people identify a specific way. So, like, people, they see the label and they're like, I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a whatever it may be. And, not to say that there aren't actual philosophies and ideologies, but a lot of those have morphed over time. There's a lot of different thinkers that have codified those ideologies, and they don't all agree upon everything.
Huh.
So it's pretty comprehensive. Um, this is why, like, I hear a lot of the dissident right saying the Enlightenment is the problem, and I've asked so many of them, like, so which Enlightenment specifically? Like, is there a specific thinker you have beef with? Because, I mean, I was a philosophy major, and I can't keep track of all of it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
so, but yeah. So I don't. But what I do see is that people will identify a specific way, and then they become a really good target audience for marketing and for moving forward psyops and culture wars. And that's been really effective. I started out my podcast kind of like this with naive kind of view, or at least from my perspective, it seems naive now. No judgment to anybody who thinks this way, but but I started out feeling like we could just get the right people in office, because the Republicans are really behaving like controlled opposition to the left. And we could just get the right people in office and vote our way out of this. We'll fix this whole mess. And then a few months into it, I was like, so I think the Republican Party was created to be controlled opposition for the left. And that is really what I think. George Washington warned us of that. He warned us against having a two-party system because he said that it would be a loophole for foreign entanglements and for, manipulation of people who want to seize control and usurp power.
yeah,
So
yeah.
kind of think that's seems to be
So,
playing out.
so if we can't vote our way out of this, and we can't insurrect our way out of this, Are you just doing the, are you going back to what's his name? It's escaping me right now. De Tocqueville? Like small communities.
I think that's a huge, huge bulwark. I do. But I do not advocate not voting. I know there's a huge movement. I'm seeing it definitely like in the millennial generation, some Gen X, but it seems to be a growing movement of people advocating not to vote because the system's so corrupt, we should just opt out. And I don't really advocate for that. I mean, I think that the solution to a problem isn't necessarily to turn a blind eye and ignore the problem.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of parallel systems, and I absolutely think that locally, small communities are a great way to grow those parallel systems, build those parallel systems and reliance networks. But I think that you still need to fight within the system, even if it's just for optics. Optics, I think, do matter. Because just if you take the example of voting, if there were just like if everybody just stopped voting, or everybody on the right, let's just say, stops voting, then they, regardless of whether they cheat or not, they have the optics of, oh, look, well, nobody turned out. Obviously, like we won.
Yeah.
Whereas if people fight within the system while working on parallel systems, I think that's much more effective. I also think that there's if you think about like the financial system, a lot of people will say, oh, well, the Federal Reserve is corrupt. It's a fiat currency. Like the whole thing needs to implode. And not that I disagree that it's corrupt and that it's a fiat system. I agree with all of that. I'm very, familiar with the story of Creature from Jekyll Island and the whole literal conspiracy they had. And then we suddenly had our lovely Christmas present with the income tax. And so, for Christmas, yeah. So I'm familiar with all of that and I don't disagree. However, I don't think people have fully thought it through. If you were to just implode the system, whether or not from top down, bottom up, or if it just disappeared, what's going to happen? Like, what's that transition period going to look like?
Yeah.
Right? If you think about it, that's going to be chaos. And what is chaos? It's a breeding ground for usurpation of power. So whether or not it's caused by people opting out or whether it's caused by, top down destruction or bottom up, it looks like all are possible right now. I still think you need a bridge to a new system. You can't just say, oh, okay, we're going to abandon that. So yeah, I'm a big fan of parallel systems and small localized networks, but I don't think you can just abandon the current system.
Can you give
But
me an
if we were
example
to
of
have,
a parallel system just so I
yeah, sure. I was just going to say, I think that if we could have like cantons, but without the socialism, that would be great. Um, but an example would be like and I know some people who are working on this, like certain kind of regionalized types banks that are backed by gold and that are not, operating on a fiat system and that are limited. They're not just, you know, operating on this just limitless print money type of concept or on just numbers on a screen. They're actually backed by something. I know some people who are working on some kind of gold backed type of bank system. So that's just an example. I mean, local farming is an example. Like, opt out of the big mass production. And, I remember in 2020, just so many people kept saying boycott, boycott. And, things like Target and Amazon. And, okay, if you don't feel aligned and feel like something you can do, go for it. But I kept saying to people, because I was watching literally just like right behind me, the main street of Santa Monica, one business after the next being shut down. And it was like, generations of family owned businesses. And so I kept telling people, I'm like, if you really care, because do you think that like Bezos is going to care that you didn't buy from them this year? Like they're not going to feel the impact of that. But if the mom and pop shop down the block, if you feel aligned with them, boycott from them, go and support them. I kept saying boycott, boycott, don't boycott. And I think that's a way of building parallel systems is, whether it be you farm for your own family, if you have the means to do that, you homeschool, your family, you support the mom and pop shop down the street. I mean, these are ways of building parallel systems that opt out of the big, corporatocracy structure. Yeah.
Do you have a parallel institution that you run? Do you have a sweatshop in your backyard?
No, I don't.
No.
No, I'm just right now in the information world. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's my parallel is just not buying into all the indoctrination. Although, none of us are impervious to programming, and I'm sure I've got my share of it, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to deprogram myself wherever I can.
What about aerial acrobatics? Can you
Mhm.
tell me a story of how you got into that and some amazing
Sure.
feat that you've accomplished?
Thank you. So when I tried out for American Ninja Warrior, and I didn't get picked to run the course, but I was doing the training, and it was a great experience, great opportunity. I got to meet some of the like top contestants of the show and train with them, and it was super, super fun and really challenging. But I have very, very small hands. So I knew that, most of it is grip strength, and I knew I was going to have to compensate by developing greater strength to compensate for lack of surface area. And I had remembered seeing when I lived in New York some people who were dancing from silks. And I was a gymnast growing up. Um, and that story was actually pretty
Huh.
interesting too. It came out of my mom had this idea to develop a balance beam for me because I'm blind in one eye and I didn't have hearing aids, and I wore a patch over my sighted eye every other day of my childhood. So I was essentially blind and deaf every other day.
Why the patch?
They were hoping to strengthen like
Yeah, okay.
whatever
Yeah.
was left of the optic nerve. And
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, unfortunately, it didn't work out quite the way that they had hoped. But
Yeah.
so I was essentially blind and deaf every other day of my childhood. And my reward at the end of the week, my grandfather built this beam, and my reward at the end of the week, if I completed it, regardless of whether I had the patch on or not, was that they would make the beam narrower. So they would give me a new challenge. And when I
Huh.
was about 4 years old, I went to day camp, and they had a beam in the gymnasium. And so I was like, oh, it looked familiar. And, I was in a new environment. It was very overwhelming, kind of scary for me. And I was like, there's a beam. And so I ran over to it. And so I fell in love with gymnastics. And when I saw later, when I lived in New York, I saw people dancing from these silks. And I was like, it's kind of like gymnastics in the air. I think I could do that.
Huh.
And when I was training for Ninja Warrior, I remembered that. And I thought that's probably a great way to build grip strength, and it would be a ton of fun. And so I tried it and I fell in love with it. Yeah.
And
So
where does one head in aerial acrobatics? Like, are there
the
different like
circus,
strains of
there are.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, silks is probably one of the most common and most, familiar to people because of Cirque du Soleil. But they're all different apparatus. So there's like the hoop, which is called lyra, the big hoop. I actually do pocket lyra, so it's a very small hoop, and then I have like a little sling on that. And so, yeah, I dance in that. Then there's sling. So there's sling and hammock, and it's just like it sounds, but sling has a single point, hammock has 2 points. So it's like silks, but it's looped,
Huh.
and you can dance in that. There's rope, aerial rope, which I love also. That's similar to silks, but it's a rope. In French, they call it cordelice, which means straight rope. And what else is there? There's pole is put in the same category. And actually, 2 days after the lockdowns, I was supposed to do my first pole competition, and of course that got canceled, and I was very devastated. I had worked really hard on it, and it really
Oh
was
no.
like a gymnastics routine, but with two vertical bars instead of horizontal
Wait, so
bars.
you're just like spinning around one and then going to the other and
I
loop-de-looping
had
and
one on
stuff like that?
static and one was on spin. Yeah. And so I did different kinds of moves on each. So
Huh.
some of the more like strength oriented moves would be on the static pole, and I did some more of the flowy, kind of more dancey stuff on the spinning pole. But
Yeah.
yeah, then there's trapeze, there's flying trapeze, and then there's static trapeze. And then there's like other really weird shapes. Like I've done aerial heart, I've done aerial cube. You can do some kind of like fun partner stuff. And they have like other weird shapes. And yeah,
What's the one where you throw each other around? That's the trapeze.
yes,
Do you do
yes,
that?
that's
Do
true.
you do the throwing or the
I've
being
done
thrown?
flying trapeze.
Yeah.
I, I've done both actually. I've done the catching and I've been thrown.
Did you
Yes.
have to overcome like any sort of relationship to the ground being far away from you?
Yes. So I don't have depth perception. I don't have motion parallax because I'm blind in one eye. So
Oh,
yeah, so I definitely that's a bit of a challenge, but so with Ninja Warrior that was the most challenging thing for me. So the strength things were much easier because I could, build strength if you don't have it, you can work towards, I mean, not infinite, but like
Yeah.
you can work towards that. But the catch release stuff was just terrifying because I never knew how far away anything was.
Oh, wow.
I was always kind of just guessing, like midair. Yeah,
Really?
I wasn't very good at it.
Okay.
But
I mean, does your body like have a sense like without vision to that you've noticed that your body is relying on other senses like it just a
yeah,
innate
yeah. Well, you can develop a sense of muscle memory. So I can get
and
kind of
timing?
a.
Yeah.
You can adjudicate for depth perception. What you can adjudicate for is a motion parallax. So depth perception, I can measure up against my periphery
Okay.
and then kind of gauge how far away something might be.
Yeah.
It's basically like doing, geometry in your
Yeah.
head. I mean,
Yeah.
not consciously, but it's
When you
visual
walk into a
spatial.
room or you're trying to avoid like a
Mhm.
crowd or something like that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that I can do. Um, but when something's moving, like when you're catching a ball, you're throwing a ball, that I
Wow.
really struggle with. I came in 16th of an inch of going blind because I missed a catch playing lacrosse and we scratched a 16th of an inch away from my cornea.
Oh,
So that was,
sheesh. Oh, wow.
yeah.
You live such a life of danger.
Well, I don't do lacrosse anymore, so yeah.
Do you think that you're on any lists yet?
So I don't know. I mean, I think I'm on some YouTube list, but I don't
I mean,
I don't know.
do you worry about like speaking about these different things, having to watch your
No,
back or
so
anything like
the
that?
I joke because when I was 7 years old, the CIA tried to recruit me. So there's like a running joke that,
Okay.
like I'm on a list. But my parents said no. We were very fortunate, in my opinion, that we missed that. So they did, they did say no, my parents. So, but I don't know. I don't really
Maybe
worry.
they said yes and you were split and you've yet to
I've
be
heard people
activated.
say that theory. Yes, that people have said that. I don't think so, but people have joked with me about that. I don't know. I think most people who have said anything that's dissident are probably on some sort of a list, whether it's an actual list or if it's just,
Yeah.
an AI data point. Because
Yeah.
I think we have to be cognizant of how, AI is being programmed right now and how they're using social media to data mine.
Yeah.
And so I think anybody who's ever said anything that they perceive, or not even the they, but just that has been programmed into the algorithm as being somewhat dissident,
Yeah.
depending on what is dissident at that point in time, I think probably is whether or not they're on an official list or not. There might be some, uh, you know, potential targeting at some point.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts about the future? I was just reading about accelerationism before we got on, and which is just
Okay.
it's a whole can of worms. Like there's all these different thinkers and stuff, and they just kind of suppose that the future is going to be more and more technologically advanced, and eventually it's just going to strip away the human. It's just going to kind of plow away the human. So I'm just wondering, like, when you use these digital environments, like, to what degree are you worried about, I don't know, the Apple Vision Pro or or like Elon Musk or like these like that faceless alphabet company like Google and YouTube in it with the FBI and stuff like that. Like, do you think that it's a hopeful outlook?
No, I don't think it's hopeful. I am concerned with it. There's definitely a transhuman agenda. I don't know how many people are aware there's a post-human agenda. I thought that there was just one book on it, the handbook on post-humanism, but it turns out there is actually several books on post-humanism, and
What is that
yeah.
as opposed to transhumanism? What's
So
post-human?
transhumanism is kind of like this hybrid of, like more like a robot merging with man, kind of a biodigital convergence type
Yeah,
of a world and execution. Of course, I think people underestimate or undermine how much power and how much has already occurred in the realm of cybernetics. We don't actually even need to have chips in our heads. Like
yeah,
the screens and the way we interact with technology has already altered our brain chemistry and our neurology and the way that we function,
yeah,
um, we think, the way we function, the way we navigate. So,
For the better,
that
for the
has,
worse? What do you think?
I honestly
Trade-off?
think for the worst.
Worst.
I think it's for the worst. I mean, that's not to say that there are no benefits to technology. I mean, we're talking through technology right now. I love that I can, you know, go to the internet and get like just infinite. I mean, at least it appears information at my fingertips, although, sometimes it's censored more than I'd like. And some of the
Yeah.
things I'd really like to dig into, I can't get a hold of. But, for the most part, we have so much at our fingertips, and that's incredible. There are trade-offs for sure. But as far as the outlook of the future of humanity, I think this whole transgender agenda is largely to pave the way for transhumanism, which I think is paving the way for a post-human world. So the UN 100, I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah.
them and
Yeah.
what they're doing. So the UN 100, it's the centennial of the UN, which is they're imagining the world in 2045, which is 100 years since the inception of the UN. And they are working in conjunction with Boston Global Forum. And they are working to create an AI world society. And it really looks like a cyber Satan.
Oh,
They talk about like a one world religion. That is something that has been, touted quite a bit amongst these, the parasite class, if you will. That's what I call them. But
yeah.
they've talked a lot about this. That's very much in the plans. And when those plans go back, like at least centuries, but honestly, I would say millennia, because you look back at like the mystery schools and that's millennia. But it looks like that religion is going to be like an AI god. That's what it does look like. And they talk about the hub of this AI world society being in Ukraine, and they talk about remaking Ukraine. This is being done, as I said, in conjunction with Boston Global Forum. Michael Dukakis, the former governor of Massachusetts, is heading this, and he wrote a book. It's called "Remaking the World: The Age of Global Enlightenment."
Huh.
And it is all, yeah, it's all about having an AI interconnected world, an AI world society, Ukraine being the hub, and then these like, 15-minute cities, these smart cities, these C40 cities are going to be, kind of funneled into
Why
this
Ukraine?
centralized hub. They did a whole symposium on Ukraine, how Ukraine was decimated by the war, and we need to funnel more money into it to rebuild it so that we can rebuild the AI world society in Ukraine. I don't know. I mean, I have theories on it, but I don't have anything concrete.
Yeah.
But it does look like Ukraine, it was kind of artificially created in many ways, and it does look like it was a hub for some of these centralized powers. There's a lot of, World Economic Forum kind of connections, and it just looks like they've kind of, I don't know specifically why they've created Ukraine to be the hub of all of this, but it does seem like there's a lot of ties.
Huh.
And yeah,
Do you have any
so
inside information on that weird event in Maui? I don't know why I'm bringing it up, but you just brought up
do I have any?
that 15-minute
Well,
city thing.
yeah, it was designated as a 15-minute city, and I don't think that's a coincidence. East Palestine was designated as a 15-minute city. That's where they had
Who does
that
these
train.
designations? They're like, I'll take Palestine.
Um, I don't know, but there is like a UN map
Oh, okay.
that has, yeah. So when I was doing the, research on the NACs, I was looking at how far back a lot of this goes. And a lot of this is tied to what's called the 30 by 30 agenda. And this is the premise that by 2030, which of course, Agenda 2030. So by 2030, 30% of the world's lands and oceans could not be inhabited by humans or produced by humans. And this is a stepping stone to what's called the Half Earth Agenda, which was a book written by E.O. Wilson. He was a biologist, and I can't remember what year, but it was a while ago. And it's the same idea, but now half of the Earth can be uninhabited. And this was put forth the Biden administration. Actually, 6 days after he got into office, he implemented the 30 by 30 agenda, and it got a lot of pushback. And so they renamed it. They renamed it America the Beautiful,
Oh,
and it's the same plan.
Which is
So
just to regulate people to cities and kick people off of.
it's to try and push people into these cities. Of course, it's a lot of things. It's to usurp the lands and to commodify the resources. But yeah, there does seem to be a real push to put people into the cities. But I brought that up because when I was doing that research, I found this map, and it was a UN map that talks about like the zoning of where would be like limited use, minimal restricted use, or complete non-human enter zones, like no-go zones. And
Yeah.
then yeah, and then there were some areas that could be used, and it was like a couple of black dots. It was barely existent.
Wow.
So yeah.
What do you, how do you keep your head on straight when you're looking at all the reptiles that are running everything?
I don't know. I mean, I focused on things that I like and that I enjoy and that I'm
Do you
grateful for.
get disoriented by like going down and constructing like one after another of these pieces of this very
Puzzle?
big, yeah, this big puzzle of power,
No, I think it what?
puzzle of power.
Puzzle of power. No, I mean I think it's helpful. Like you
Huh.
can't defeat an enemy that you don't know is there. You can't I don't think you can empower yourself if you don't know that there are threats. So I think, to some degree knowledge can be power, and I think that the information is useful and can be helpful.
Yeah.
And I mean, even though a lot of it is very dark, it can also be kind of fascinating. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, how do things really work this way? And it's so intricate. And yeah, so no, I mean, there's a lot of things to be really grateful for. There's a lot of really beautiful things. So I want to preserve those things. And if we can't, my thought is that there's a book, None Dare Call it Conspiracy. At the end of the book, they say conspiracies can only survive in the dark. And so I always add my tagline is that, and therefore it's incumbent upon the light to shine on it and expose it.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the goal. It's just to, seek light, shine light, and hopefully we can preserve the things that are good, true, and beautiful. So.
Do you have which direction is your beam heading this year? Like, do you have coming up? Are you working on a like a series or a project or what's next on your plate?
Well, I'm really hoping I've started to outline a book. So that's on my agenda.
Yeah.
I definitely want to get that done. I'd like to do another cause fest. I think that's really important. I think, that's one of the things that I talked about when we did the first one is that I feel like a lot of people will fight against things, but very few people talk about what they're for.
Yeah.
And that's what Cause Fest was really about. It's like you can't really effectuate change in the culture if you're not putting forth. Like you can tell the kids like all this stuff, all this pop culture is degenerate, it's bad. Great. Well, what are you offering them in exchange? And I wanted to show that there could be some good, clean fun, that is good art, that is enjoyable,
Yeah.
and that it doesn't have to all be degenerate, but here's an option. So that is really important to me. Yeah. And then I guess keep moving forward with the podcast. And we have a couple of different like broadcasting streams we're going to start working with and, maybe do some more like 24/7 type style. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah.
Are you gonna like
So
duplicate yourself so you can just be on all the time?
yeah, no, I think we'll like play some of I know a lot of the earlier stuff I think didn't really get any play. So,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
there's a lot of the conversations are pretty evergreen. So, and then maybe bring people on. I don't know. I'd love to see where all of that goes, but definitely focus on growing the podcast and,
Yeah.
working on the different. I'm going to continue with the radio show, do some more of these like solo style lectures and share information and research on deep dives. And yeah. I don't know. I think that's what's on the agenda.
Has
And
there been
somewhere in
like
that, but
has there been a singular book that's really like uh, excited your neurons like completely like one of your favorite?
well, one of the books that like spawned me on this journey, it was like was it 2021? I think it was Dr. John Coleman's book on Tavistock. And now you can get it for really cheap.
No?
It's yeah, now it's like $30 on Amazon, but initially it was like almost $5,000.
Whoa.
I'm sure that this is an edited version and they probably cut stuff out, but yeah, that was really Tavistock was definitely like a rabbit hole for me. And I think it converged so many of my previous paths and my previous
Huh.
schools of study, because it kind of the philosophy, psychology, entertainment industry, they talk a lot about how they've used the arts to for social engineering and
Yeah.
steering. And they really have. So yeah. So that was so I was kind of riveted by, oh my gosh, there's like a steering committee that's doing this. And they're very much a monster with lots of tentacles.
Really. Yeah.
They're kind of the brainchild behind like the Stanford Research Institute, the Changing Images of Man document, like very much came out of Tavistock. The Rand Institute, which does a lot of our psychological warfare, um, military operations, and yeah, so a lot of think tanks are working under Tavistock. So
Wow.
yeah,
Like, I
I
didn't know you
know.
had so many rugs that you've inspected under.
Yeah. That's what I've been doing for the past years.
Wow.
Definitely diving, like turning over rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where can people find you? Where are you
So you can find me
located? Yeah.
CourtenayTurner.com, and I spell my name a little differently. It's like Courtenay, but it is pronounced Courtney, but
Yeah.
it's COURTENAY TURNER.com. And yeah, you can find my podcast, my articles. You can contact me through there. All my social media is on there. And if you prefer other portals for podcasts, all of that's listed on there too. So
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I can't remember who connected us, but I'm really glad to have met you, and I'm looking forward to like learning more from your work, about your work.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. I think it was she goes by Chrissy Meow Mom on
Oh yeah, it was.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah. She's a special channel regular. She's been aiding me for many a month now.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
we got to meet in person actually pretty recently, so
Oh,
that was
really? At one
cool.
of your artist
No,
things?
it was at AmFest.
What's that? Amfest? Yeah.
AmFest, America Fest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like a turning point.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was in Phoenix. Yeah. So I was there. We ended up having a booth, but yeah, and doing interviews and stuff. So
Oh,
but yeah, so I
well,
was there.
well, thank you so much,
Cool.
and thank your tech bro for
Oh yeah,
setting us up.
he's great because I am not technically savvy at all. But yeah, yeah. So I'm glad we got that figured out. This is so weird. I don't know.
Yeah,
That
there's
was
always a glitch here and there. What are you gonna do?
yes.